As the city is swallowed by the cobalt dusk, the secrets of the day begin to find their way into the light. We explore the mysterious and beautiful narratives that only reveal themselves when the sun goes down. Hit subscribe now and follow us into the deep blue night. My son-in-law told my daughter I was slowing down the business. 3 days after I walked out of my own restaurant without saying a word, my phone showed 112 missed calls. By then, I was sitting on a porch in Vermont, watching the leaves turn red, holding my wife's hand and smiling for the first time in months. Let me tell you how a 63-year-old man that his son-in-law called a relic of the past dismantled in 4 days what took his son-in-law 2 years to build. But first, you need to understand what I built, and why I almost let them take it. My name is George Calloway. I was born in a small town in rural Kentucky, the second of 5 kids. My father drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. My mother cleaned houses for families who lived on the good side of town. We never went hungry, but we never had enough. I learned early that the difference between having enough and having nothing was one missed paycheck. At 19, I moved to Nashville with a duffel bag and exactly $240 saved from mowing lawns and washing dishes. I got a job as a line cook at a diner on Broadway, the kind of place tourists walked past but never walked into. The owner, a retired Army man named Phil Granger, took one look at me and said, "You look like someone who doesn't quit easy." I told him he was right. I worked that kitchen for 4 years. Phil taught me everything. Not just how to cook, but how to run a place, how to manage inventory, how to talk to suppliers, how to handle a difficult customer without losing your composure or your dignity. When Phil decided to retire and sell the diner, he offered it to me first. The bank laughed at my loan application twice before a small credit union in East Nashville finally said yes. I renamed it Calloway's. I was 24 years old, terrified, and more alive than I had ever felt. My wife Sandra had been with me since the beginning. We met at a church potluck when I was 22. She brought a sweet potato pie that I ate 3 slices of before I even asked her name. We got married on a Saturday in October. The same week I signed the lease on the diner's building. She kept the books in a yellow legal pad for the first 3 years. Calloway's grew slowly, the way real things grow. Not overnight, not with investors or big money. Just good food, honest portions, and a reputation that spread the way reputations spread in a city that loves to eat. By the time I was 40, I had opened a second location across the river in Brentwood. By 45, a third in Franklin. By 50, Calloway's had 5 restaurants, a catering division, and a name that people in Middle Tennessee knew. I employed over 90 people. Several of them had been with me for more than 15 years. I gave my daughter everything I never had. Private school, a college education at Vanderbilt, vacations, a car when she turned 17, a position in the business the summer after she graduated, before she even had to ask. My daughter is smart, organized, and capable. I believed she would run Calloway's someday. I still believe she could have, if things had gone differently. She married her husband 3 years ago. He came from money. His family had made their fortune in commercial real estate development across Tennessee and Georgia. He was polished. He always said the right thing in the right setting. At the wedding, he gave a toast that made Sandra cry. I thought I had gotten lucky with a son-in-law. The first year, everything seemed fine. He started spending time at the restaurants, learning the operations, asking questions. I appreciated it. I thought he was genuinely interested in understanding what I had built, so that one day he and my daughter could carry it forward together. But then the comments started. Small ones at first. Casual observations over dinner. "Dad, have you looked at what Cracker Barrel is doing with their loyalty app? The tech side of this industry is moving fast." Or at a staff meeting. "George, I was talking to a consultant friend of mine, and he thinks the Franklin location's labor cost percentage is about 4 points higher than the industry benchmark." He never said these things with anger. He said them with a smile, with the tone of someone who was simply being helpful. My daughter started echoing him. At first, she added her own thoughts. Then gradually, she just repeated what he had said, sometimes word for word. "Dad, my husband thinks we should reconsider the catering division. He says it's eating margin without adding brand value." Sandra noticed it before I did. She told me over coffee one morning that my daughter didn't look like herself lately. I told her she was just growing into leadership. Sandra looked at me over her mug and said, "George, that girl is not growing into anything. She's shrinking." I defended them both. I told Sandra her instincts were wrong this time. I was wrong. 8 months ago, my son-in-law came to my office at the Franklin location with a folder under his arm and my daughter at his side. She stood slightly behind him. That detail hit me before a single word was spoken. He sat down without being invited to. My daughter stayed standing near the door. "George," he said, and I noticed he had stopped calling me Dad about 4 months earlier. "We've been doing a deep analysis of the business. Revenue is flat. The catering arm is underperforming. 2 of the locations need capital reinvestment. And frankly, the brand needs to evolve if it's going to stay relevant in this market." I asked him what he was suggesting. He opened the folder. There were charts, projections, a consulting report with a logo I didn't recognize. "We think the best path forward for Calloway's is a restructuring, consolidate ownership into a new LLC, bring in a small private equity partner for the reinvestment capital, and transition operational leadership to a management team that my daughter and I would oversee." I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the floor. "And where does that leave me?" I asked. He smiled. The smile I had come to understand was not a real smile. "You'd have a board seat, advisory capacity. Your legacy is protected. But George, let's be honest with each other. The industry has changed. The margins are tight. Running 5 restaurants in this environment requires a different skill set than what built this business. You've done something extraordinary, but it's time to let the next generation take it the rest of the way." My daughter finally looked up. Her eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. I sat for a moment with that, with the folder on my desk, with the charts someone had paid to produce to make this conversation look like a business decision instead of what it was. "Let me review the documents," I said. "Have your attorney send everything over. I'll give you an answer in a week." He seemed genuinely surprised I hadn't pushed back harder. He stood, shook my hand, and told me this was the right move for everyone. My daughter hugged me at the door. It was brief. She whispered that she loved me. I told her I loved her too. I meant it. I still do. That night I sat in the dark at the kitchen table for a long time. Sandra found me there at 11. She sat across from me and waited. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me one question. "What are you going to do?" Not, "Maybe he means well." Not, "Give it time." Just, "What are you going to do?" That was the moment I understood she had seen this coming longer than I had. The documents arrived 4 days later. 52 pages. I read every word. I know how to read a contract. I have been reading contracts since I was 24 years old. What was buried inside those 52 pages was not a restructuring. It was a transfer. My daughter and her husband would assume controlling interest in the new LLC. I would receive a 4% advisory stake with no voting rights and no operational authority. A clause on page 38 specified that I would receive a one-time payment of $50,000 as consideration for the transition of intellectual property and brand assets. $50,000. For something I had built over 39 years. For 5 restaurants and a catering division, and a name that 90 people showed up to work for every morning. Sandra read page 38 over my shoulder. She put her hand flat on the table. "George," she said, "that is not a restructuring. That is theft dressed up in a suit." "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what it is." I did not call my son-in-law. I did not call my daughter. I slept very little that night. By 4 in the morning, I was in the kitchen with cold coffee and a clear head, and I knew what I needed to do. At 8 o'clock, I drove to the office of a man named Warren Tully. Warren had been my attorney since I signed the deed on the second Calloway's location in Brentwood. He was 71, semi-retired, and the kind of lawyer who remembered everything he had ever read. His secretary looked up when I walked in without an appointment. "Tell him it's George Calloway, and it's urgent." Warren came to the door himself 30 seconds later. He took one look at my face and waved me in. I handed him the documents. He read in silence for 20 minutes. I watched his expression move from careful attention to visible irritation. He set the papers down and removed his glasses. "George, I have to ask you something plain. Did you give any indication that you were willing to do this?" I told him I had said I would review the documents and give an answer in a week. "Then the company is still entirely yours." "For now," I said, "for as long as you want it to be." He leaned back. "What do you want to do?" I told him I wanted to sell all 5 locations, the catering division, the brand, everything, before the end of the week. Warren looked at me for a long moment. He had known me for 19 years. He understood what he was hearing. "George, that is a significant decision. Calloway's is your life's work." "My life's work was supposed to be for my daughter," I said. "She chose differently." He nodded slowly. "There is a restaurant group out of Atlanta, Meridian Hospitality. They have been quietly acquiring regional chains with strong brand equity across the Southeast. 2 years ago, I had a conversation, on your behalf, with their acquisitions director. You weren't interested at the time. I believe they still would be. Call them today," I said. "Tell them I want to close by Friday." Warren picked up his phone. I drove to the Franklin location that afternoon. I walked through the kitchen the way I always did, checking the line, saying hello to the staff. Maria, who had been running my prep kitchen for 16 years, was chopping onions at the stainless steel table. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, boss." I stopped and looked at her for a moment longer than usual. She tilted her head. "You okay?" "I'm good, Maria," I said. Just taking it all in. That afternoon I did something else. I drove to every single location, walked every dining room, spoke to every manager. I didn't tell them what was coming. I just needed to see it all one more time as mine. Sandra was waiting at home when I got back. She had made dinner. Real dinner. The kind she made when something important was happening. Roast chicken. The recipe her grandmother had given her. She set the table with the good plates. "How did it go?" she asked. "Warren is making calls," I said. "By tomorrow we'll know if there's a deal." She put a plate in front of me and sat down. "George, are we going to be all right?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "We are going to be better than all right." Warren called at 11 the next morning. Meridian was interested. Very interested. Their acquisitions director was flying in from Atlanta that afternoon. They had been tracking Calloway's for 2 years. The brand was exactly what they were looking for. Their initial number was $4.2 million for the full portfolio. I told Warren to tell them I would be there at 9 the next morning. That evening, my son-in-law called. "George, just checking in on the documents. We were thinking Friday for the signing. I can have my attorney's office arrange everything. Does 10 work for you?" "10 on Friday works fine," I said. "Perfect. I think you're making the right call here. This is going to be good for everyone." "I agree," I said. "See you Friday." I hung up and looked out the window at the yard Sandra had planted over 30 years. The dogwood tree we had put in when our daughter was born. The bench we bought at an estate sale. The year Calloway's turned 10. I had given my son-in-law no indication of what was coming. He went to sleep that night believing Friday was already 1. The meeting with Meridian took 3 hours. Warren sat beside me. Their team reviewed every document. Lease agreements, supplier contracts, employee records, financial statements going back 5 years. At 11:15, their CEO, a composed woman named Patricia Ellison, slid a revised offer across the conference table. $4.6 million. Full acquisition. All 5 locations and the catering division. They wanted to retain the Calloway's name and as many staff as possible. That last part mattered to me more than I expected. I asked Patricia one thing. 2 employees at the Franklin location, my son-in-law and my daughter, were listed on the payroll as Director of Business Development and Operations Consultant, respectively. They needed to be removed from those roles immediately upon transfer of ownership. Patricia looked at me. She didn't ask why. Understood. That will be part of the terms. We signed at noon on Thursday. $4.6 million transferred to my account before close of business. Calloway's belonged to Meridian Hospitality. I called Sandra from the parking garage. She answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said. A long pause. Then, "Come home, George." That night, I did two more things. I called my payroll manager and removed my son-in-law and my daughter from the Calloway's accounts. I suspended their direct deposits. I closed the company credit cards. Then I booked 2 plane tickets. Burlington, Vermont. Sandra had talked about Vermont in the fall for 15 years. We had never gone. I bought the tickets for the following morning. I packed 1 bag. I left a note on the kitchen counter in case anyone came by. "Gone for a while. We're fine." I turned my phone to silent at 6 in the morning on Friday. My son-in-law arrived at my house at 9:30 to pick me up for the signing. I know this because my neighbor called Sandra 2 days later and mentioned seeing a car sitting in our driveway for a long time. He rang the bell. No answer. He called my phone. Voicemail. He called Sandra. Voicemail. Then he drove to the Franklin location of Calloway's and walked in to find strangers behind the host stand and a Meridian Hospitality District manager conducting a staff orientation in the back dining room. The new manager, a young man who had no idea who my son-in-law was, politely informed him that the business was under new ownership and asked if he had an appointment. My son-in-law said his name. The manager checked a printed list. "I'm sorry, sir. Your access credentials have been deactivated. You'll need to contact our HR department." I know this because Maria called me 3 days later and told me the story herself, laughing so hard she had to stop twice to catch her breath. Sandra and I landed in Burlington on a Friday afternoon. The air was cold and clean, in a way Nashville never is. The leaves were exactly what she had always described, red and orange and gold, like something painted deliberately. We had rented a small house 20 minutes outside the city, right on the edge of a lake. We had no plan, nowhere to be, nothing to manage. The calls started at 10:15 Friday morning. I know, because I checked the log later. By Friday evening, 37 missed calls. By Saturday morning, 61. By Sunday night, 112. Sandra and I were sitting on the porch of the rental house on Saturday evening with hot cider and wool blankets when she nodded at my phone sitting face down on the wooden railing. "Are you going to check it?" "Not yet," I said. "Are you at peace with what you did?" I thought about it honestly. I'm at peace with defending what was mine. I'm not at peace with my daughter. Sandra nodded. She understood the difference. I turned the phone over on the 3rd day and read through the messages in order. My son-in-law's early messages were confusion shading into disbelief. "George, where are you?" "We're at the attorney's office." Then, "There are new people at the Franklin location. What is going on?" Then, "George, this is not acceptable. Call me immediately." The later messages had a harder edge. "You had no right to sell that business. My wife had an expectation of inheritance. Our attorney says this is actionable. You will be hearing from us." My daughter's messages were different. The first few were logistical. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Are you and Mom okay?" Then something shifted. "Dad, my husband told me what happened. He told me you sold everything. I don't understand. Why didn't you talk to me?" Then 2 days later, "Dad, I've been thinking. I've been thinking a lot. Please call me." Her last message came on Sunday night. She sounded very different from the woman who had stood near the door of my office and looked at the floor while her husband spoke. "Dad, I don't know if you're going to hear this, but I need to say it anyway. I know what those documents were. I knew when I read them. I told myself it was legal restructuring. I let him convince me it was normal. I stood in your office and I couldn't look at you. I couldn't look at you, Dad. And I keep thinking about that. About the fact that I couldn't look at you. I think I've been so afraid of losing him that I've been willing to lose everything else. I don't know if that's forgivable. I don't know if I deserve you to answer. But I miss my father. And I am so sorry. I set the phone down on the railing. Sandra was watching me. What did she say? I told her. Sandra looked out at the lake. A long time passed. The light was fading over the water, and the trees on the far bank were turning dark. She's not him, George. I know. She made a terrible choice. But she's not him. I know that too. Sandra reached over and took the phone from the railing. She handed it to me. You don't have to answer tonight, but when you're ready, answer her. Not him. Her. I held the phone for a while without doing anything with it. There is something that happens when you have built something with your hands over 4 decades. When you have gotten up before sunrise every day of your adult life to earn what you have, and then someone who has known you for 3 years decides that your time is finished, that you are a liability, that your worth can be calculated at $50,000 on page 38 of a document designed to confuse you. Something hardens, something that was always there but had no reason to show itself. A kind of cold clarity. But there is also something that happens when you hear your daughter's voice crack at the end of a voicemail. Something that has no name but that every parent who has loved a child without reservation will recognize. I called Warren the next morning from the porch, while Sandra slept. The lawsuit, I said. How serious is it? His attorney sent a demand letter yesterday. They're claiming tortious interference with an expected inheritance and intentional infliction of emotional distress. George, it has very little legal merit. You own that business outright. There was no signed agreement, no formal promise of succession, nothing that establishes his client's legal claim. The more interesting question to me is the attempted dispossession angle, the documents they had you sign. He didn't get me to sign anything. No. But the attempt itself is documented. The documents they prepared, the false framing of tax irregularities, the inadequate consideration clause. If we respond to this lawsuit, we can turn it around and make him very uncomfortable. Do that, I said. Make him very uncomfortable. We came back to Nashville 11 days later. Sandra said she wanted to sleep in her own bed. I said I wanted real barbecue. We landed on a Tuesday evening to gray skies and the smell of rain, and the particular weight of unfinished business. My son-in-law's lawsuit was filed formally the following Monday. My daughter was listed as a co-plaintiff. Warren called me as I was reading the filing. George, there's something you need to know about the co-plaintiff designation. Is my daughter being forced to participate in this? A pause. That is my strong suspicion, yes. Her signature is on the filing, but her attorney is his attorney. She has no independent counsel. I thought about that for a long time. Then I did something my son-in-law would not have predicted. I called my daughter. She answered before the second ring. I could hear from the sound of her breathing that she had been waiting. Dad, are you alone right now? A pause. He's at his attorney's office. Can we meet? Just you and me. Someplace that isn't your house. She named a coffee shop in East Nashville we used to go to when she was in college. I told her I'd be there in 45 minutes. She was already there when I arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept well in weeks. I sat down across from her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. A long moment. Do you have your own attorney? I asked. No. You need one. Not his attorney. Yours. She looked down at her coffee cup. He told me this was the only way to recover what we lost. What did you lose? She looked up. Her eyes were red. I lost you. I sat with that. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be honest with me. Did you understand what was in those documents? The ones his attorney prepared? She was quiet for a long time. Then, I told myself I didn't. But I did. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I understood enough. I just kept telling myself it was his idea. That he knew what was legal. That you would be okay. I kept making it smaller in my mind than it was. And Dad, I stood in your office and I watched you read our faces and I couldn't say a word. I have thought about that every single day since. Why? She shook her head. Because I was afraid. Not of you. Of him. Of what he would think if I disagreed. He has a way of making you feel like if you don't follow his lead, you've failed somehow. Like you're not smart enough. Like you're not enough. I had heard something like this before, in my daughter's voicemail, in the pattern of the past year. You need to get your own attorney, I said again, before you do anything else. And you need to remove yourself from this lawsuit. He'll be furious. Yes, he will. She looked at me. And then what? And then you decide what you want your life to look like. Not what he wants. You. She started crying quietly. Not dramatically. Just the kind of tears that come when something has been held in for too long. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I love you, I said. That has not changed. But love doesn't mean I will let someone use you to take what I built. And love doesn't mean you have to shrink yourself down to fit into what he needs you to be. She nodded. She couldn't speak. One step at a time, I said. Start with the attorney. 3 days later, she retained her own counsel. 1 week after that, she withdrew from the lawsuit. Her husband's case without her was considerably thinner. Warren filed a counter-response documenting the original fraudulent transaction attempt in detail. The demand letter for damages was formally dropped 6 weeks later. My son-in-law called me once after that. I answered. I let him say what he needed to say. He told me I had destroyed his future, that I was a bitter old man who couldn't let go, that what I had done was unforgivable. I told him that I wished him well. Then I told him I wouldn't be speaking with him again. He called 3 more times. I didn't answer. I didn't count the calls. I didn't need to. My daughter and her husband separated 2 months after that. She moved back to Nashville from the house they had shared in Brentwood. She got a job at a restaurant consulting firm downtown. She is good at it. She has called me 3 times a week since September. We are not where we were. We may never be entirely where we were, but we are somewhere. And somewhere is a beginning. Sandra and I bought a small house in East Nashville, not far from where I cooked my first meal in this city 40 years ago. It has a front porch and a garden and a kitchen. Sandra has already claimed completely. I have no employees to manage, and no inventory to order, and no lease renewals to negotiate. For the first time since I was 24 years old, I have nothing I am required to do tomorrow. Some mornings that feels like freedom. Some mornings it feels like something I haven't found a name for yet. I have $4.6 million in an account. I have a wife who has been with me through every single thing. I have a daughter who is finding her own way back. I have my name, which is the same name it was when I walked into Phil Granger's diner with $240 and a need to prove something. They called me a relic. They prepared documents designed to confuse me. They stood in my office and looked at me like a problem to be managed. But here is what I know. After 63 years of getting up before sunrise and building something from nothing, a man who knows what he built does not need anyone to tell him what it is worth. And a father who loves his daughter does not give up on her just because she got lost for a while. That is not weakness. That is the longest game there is.